Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. This is the last lesson of the playlist about Spring Security Fundamentals, and I want to finish today with unit and integration tests in general, because we discussed about integrating with Spring Security. Thank you very much for being here with me today as well. And I hope you will enjoy our discussion. If you're watching the event live, don't forget that you have a live chat and you can share your questions or opinions in the live chat. If you don't follow me live now, you can still ask your questions or share your opinions in the comment section. And of course, I do invite you all to find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I have a lot of friends there as well. We had the first part in which we discussed integration tests with Spring Security, so this is a continuation of the previous lesson, and I hope to finish everything I want to say about the fundamentals on the testing side, which is again one of the most important things in software development in general, in my opinion. Testing, either unit or integration testing, and of course end-to-end testing as well, should not be missing from any project. So it is what creates robustness of a software application and makes it makes it able to like be there, live, be enhanced, be profitable for many years. Let me share you my screen, because I know you want to see code, and I know in the previous discussion we talked about with user details annotation, which is a very important annotation, because using it you cover like maybe 90+% of the cases. So that's why I started with it when discussing tests, because again, if you know about with user details, probably you cover, like in most cases, applications even use only that to create the part of Spring Security, of integration with Spring Security in unit and integration tests. And as we discussed in the previous lesson, is also something that's completely decoupled from the framework that you use. So I created my examples with JUnit 5 probably, and sometimes I use MockMVC, but the examples that I'm showing you here are the same in terms of the Spring Security integration, regardless of what framework you decide using. Why? Because as we discussed in the previous lesson, what we do actually is creating a mock security context. So it's whatever framework you'll use, it will simply just see a mock security context there with a specific authentication that you have added. So it will somehow fake the authentications that you can test the authorization, the logic on the authorization. But that doesn't even matter on which framework you use, because as long as you have a security context with an authentication, the application and the test in this case will see the request as having been already authenticated, so that makes it basically independent to the testing framework that you use. But of course I have to choose one, so I will continue with you using my favorites, which are JUnit 5 and MockMVC. We need to create a new project because we want to demonstrate some stuff here. Today the demonstration is for the other small percentage, and I really want to show you that as well, because yes, I know 90% of the cases you will work with user details, but it's that part of the tests which will not be able to cover with the user details annotation. So, and that for that part you actually need to customize the way the annotation looks like. And the reason is because all this headache is when you have a custom authentication object. So if you don't have if you have something that contains more details about the authenticated object that you cannot simply just put through the normal authentication, which is created by the with MockUser, I said user details previously, sorry. With MockUser is what I wanted to say. You will see me again now writing it, and it will be more clear. Then you need to customize the way the annotation looks like. So this is Spring Security. I think it's lesson 22. Oop, not what I wanted to do. Lesson 22 or 2022 C22 E1. I think that was the convention. I will change my location afterwards. I only need web and Spring Security for my demonstration here, so I'm gonna add only these dependencies, and of course I will create the project. So with this being said, I will create Gradle. Honestly, I don't want Gradle. Not that it matters. Okay, we can do it with Gradle, but I'm not really comfortable with Gradle in general, and it takes a longer time for everything to be built. So yeah, for some reason IntelliJ seems to now force us using Gradle, which I don't really like. Let me see if I can just change the location and use Maven instead. So it's Maven, not Gradle. That's what I want. So that's it, and change the location then. Actually, my YouTube location here. Okay, next, web and security, and hopefully that will work better. Okay, it looks like Maven now, so I feel a little bit more comfortable. And meanwhile, while this project loads, in a project for integration test, I configured a decoder that uses a known symmetric key, and this decoder that is for tests only overrides the real decoder. Then in test, I create a custom token. Okay, nice case. Is that a question that you want to ask, Yon, or it's simply just an opinion? I think creating custom stuff for tests is something sometimes we need to do. They are tests, so we have to create like mock things. And in case of Spring Security, that's what we do. We create a mock security context. So I can't say if it is a good solution or not for your specific case, because it's a specific case. So without knowing it, I cannot say it's good or not precisely there. If it's something that could be good, yes, it's something that could be good, because in some cases you need to create mock things like you did, or for fake things, fake decoders, fake contexts, and so on. So potentially, yes, it could be a good way. Now you have to understand, guys, that I cannot say for any case you describe it in a phrase and I say yes, that's a good, because if it's a specific case, it makes a lot of details for me to understand something to say it is or not good. That's what I do as a consultant, and it's not as easy as the client asks me a question, I say yes, and then I get the money, you know. Or sometimes I have to research a lot and to understand very well the project to share opinions. So that's why sometimes I don't want you to think that I don't want to answer you precisely. I do want to answer you as much as I can, but sometimes it's not really possible to be confident, because again, that's what software development is. It's a lot of compromises, sometimes details you need to know, and to take a decision to say something is good or not, it takes more than just understanding things in a couple of rows and in a couple of sentences. So with that being said, DemoController, just simple controller. Let me try that. REST controller, add notation, and of course very simple demo endpoint, just to have something on which we apply the test for. So it took me a few seconds, and then I'm going to the test side here, and in the test side I'm not even going to spend a lot of time creating more classes or renaming stuff or things like that. I just want here just make sure that I write a test. It can be a Spring Boot test, like normal Spring Boot integration test. It can be a mock MVC test depending on what you want to do. So in my case here, most likely what I have, if I start this application now, I already have some of the things that have been pre-configured, some of the configurations pre-configured by Spring Boot. And in our case, you know that if I don't change anything, which is what I will do here, Spring Boot by default applies that dummy user detail service, having the user, a password generated by default, and all the endpoints, so including mine here, is configured to require authentication. So normally, and that's something we started with in the very first lesson of this playlist, if you now start the application, you can't simply access this demo endpoint. If you don't provide the HTTP basic authentication, then you will not be able to get the demo body and the 200 OK in response, which is something we can prove. So in this case, because my configurations are applied at the endpoint level, I cannot simply inject the DemoController object, because if I would do that, then I would be able to call the method without any problem, no, because I will skip the filter. So if I want to prove something here, then I really need to use a framework that simulates the request, and one of the easiest is probably MockMVC. So we can use the auto-configure MockMVC here for our case, and create, and actually not create, but inject from the auto-configured MockMVC my MockMVC object, and then of course try to execute a call, perform a call against our only existing endpoint, which is demo. Okay, and then say and expect, and you can normally in a real world application you have to expect a lot of things. For our demonstration, we can prove things very easily, just expecting the status to be either OK or 401 or 403. So normally, okay, I always have this problem with IntelliJ that it doesn't know where the get method is, but I'm always smarter, so I just say request and get, and that's it. And then of course I need to propagate the exception, but this test now should normally fail. Do you agree with me that this should normally fail? Most likely yes. Why? Because we didn't specify anything about the authentication anywhere, no? So if we try to execute a call against an endpoint that requires authentication but we don't have authentication, then the result will be a 401. We expect 200 OK, so the status doesn't match, so the test fails. No, the test can't pass because we will get a HTTP status of the response, which is different than the expectations we stipulated on line 23 here. So while my test is running, how do I integrate my application with Google for single sign-on? I guess, Ravi, this is something that we need to take in a separate video. It's totally different than our subject now. So let me put that on my list and try to do something separately. Okay, so let's see, it should fail. Come on, fail quickly, please. We don't have all the day here. And it fails. Yeah, we check to make sure that the failure is based on our expectations and not something else. And you see that indeed the response is 401, and definitely exactly as we expected, we have a failure because of the difference of the statuses. Now you already know that you could simply have used with MockUser. Yeah, you can simply just add with MockUser here. Automatically that creates a security context, a mock security context with a mock authentication. That's what I taught you in the previous lesson. I want to just remind you that now. But the question is, because now I did with MockUser, I ran the test again, it will pass. It will pass because I have now the authentication, so the request will be correctly performed. Now the problem is, what happens if you have to specify custom things in regards to the authorization. So see, the only by placing with MockUser made the test pass. That's fine enough. But with MockUser has only a few things you can add here. So probably the most important of them being the roles or the authorities, because in many cases we implement authorization based on roles and authorities. And again, that's why I said in 90% of the cases using with MockUser will be enough to create any kind of test. But there is because the world is a jungle out there in software development, there are cases where the authorization is not made based only on roles and authorities. So the question is probably what you do if you have a custom authentication you created, which maybe it has an attribute called priority. I don't know, it's something just came to my mind now, say it's priority. So you have this authentication with a field priority, and based on the priority you get some authorization rules implemented in your app. How can you do that? Because there is no priority in the with MockUser, and of course priority is just a dummy example of mine now, but you could have one or multiple several different custom attributes in your authentication, and for that it's not possible to deal it with MockUser anymore. So what do you do in that case? So in that case, the easiest way is to create also a custom MockUser annotation, let's call it like this, and that, of course, that custom user to allow you create customize completely the security context, because this is so easy now. You only add one annotation, and behind the scenes is Spring Security creating the dummy security context with the dummy authentication. But if you have custom things on the authentication, then you have to specify how those custom things should be defined, which are their values, and you need to basically implement yourself the creation of the mock security contexts. That's the difference. So in that case, you need to really write the logic that converts a custom annotation to a custom mock security context with a custom mock authentication. So let me create a security package here. Okay, let's say it's security, and instead of with MockUser, I will create my own annotation called with custom MockUser. Of course, the name is not that important, it's just an annotation. You can choose something else if you don't want to follow the same notation I've used here, the same naming. It sounds good to me, with custom MockUser. Okay, it's not with MockUser, it's with a custom MockUser. I guess it makes sense. And then, of course, like any other annotation that you'd like to be intercepted and worked with by your application using reflection at the execution, you need to specify the correct retention policy. And remember that the retention policy, the default retention policy in Java is source. So if you don't manually set it to runtime, then an annotation is not visible and cannot be intercepted via reflection at the app's execution. So this is mandatory. And then, of course, as attributes of this custom annotation, you could add anything. Now, if you really want, you could actually go and say extend with MockUser or something like that. Can we do that? Oh no, we can't do that with annotations, it seems. Sorry. So yeah, I learned something new in Java today. Yes, thanks. I thought you can actually do that if you want, but you would have to, it seems you have to rewrite them. But anyway, the point is you do create a custom MockUser only in case you have at least one custom stuff that's not on the with MockUser itself. So say you have that string priority, no? priority, and you can even put a default value for it if you want, and you can have then as many as you need here, anything that you need based on which you create the test authentication or the test dummy authentication or whatever you want to name it. Now that's basically what you then be able to use here. So instead of MockUser, let me comment it out. Instead of MockUser, you use with custom MockUser. No, that's the plan. So the reason you created that is to be able to use this instead of this, and then being able to use this instead of the with MockUser one, you now are able to set any custom field. And you can of course again have a default, but in tests you will have to test multiple cases, so most likely you have to configure different values for your custom attributes like I do in this case. So I managed to have a custom annotation, but that's not enough for it to be understood and changed into a custom security context. You need the engine behind. You need to also define that mapper between this new annotation of yours and the security context, the mock security context that the test uses. So I will have to create a class for that, and my class will be called custom security context factory, or you can call it custom test security context factory, something like that, depending on what you're naming, what name you believe is better. And the idea of this is that it will implement the with security context factory, and then you have to specify for which annotation it applies. So I'm going here, I'm copying the name of my custom annotation I've just created. I will put it right here, and then of course I do need to override the method, which is the method where I will have to write the custom logic for changing the custom annotation into the test security context. So what I'm doing here basically is I'm writing what's behind the scenes of with MockUser. So if you learn how to use MockUser with MockUser, now remember that what we do here is what is somehow what's behind the scenes of that annotation, just that we have to customize what's behind the scenes because we are in the situation where you have custom attributes for the authorization, and you can't simply use the with MockUser, which again is probably more than enough for almost all the cases, but there will always be in the real world stuff out there where you have to customize things, and for that you still have to write unit tests and integration tests in this case, and for that you have to know how to customize them. So that's why from my point of view it's important to understand that as well. And in my experience, I don't think there is one application where I didn't have to use at least once a custom implementation such as this one. Okay, now the things are simple because the values can be taken very easily. So my one's priority, and is the only one, but all the others, then you can just take your custom values from the annotation, and that's specifically on the annotation you used on the test method. So in my case, when I run this test, it will come with priority low, and if you really want, we can debug on that, and I can prove you that's the case. And then you create your custom. Now I have to prove it somehow, so I'm just going to create a user password authentication token, which is that dummy one we use. So it's a list here, sorry, it's not only an authenticator, a grant authority, it's a list of granted authorities. So yes, that's only to to have something in the end, but normally, if you have used a custom annotation, that this should also be a custom authentication implementation. I'm not going to do that now because it would take a large amount of time to like rewrite an example, but imagine you have a custom filter and you created your own authentication. That's basically when this is the case, and you have to set up more than just things that you get on with MockUser. Now, regardless on the type of the authentication you use, you create a security context. So this is the mock or the test security context, and use security context holder and say create empty context, and then in the empty context in the end you set your authentication, which will contain, because it will be a custom one. No, so in my case I know it's stupid because I don't do anything with the priority, you would say, but it's just because I don't want to spare a lot of your time. But here you will have a custom type, a custom implementation of the authentication contract, which will need all these values that are custom and for which you decided to create a custom annotation and not use the with user details one. No, and at the very end you return this. And what happens now, we will plug this factory in, and then the test will use this factory. So instead of creating any authentication only based on roles and authorities, it will create a security context with an authentication that may contain all these values here. Okay, so yeah, again, I don't have a custom authentication here, but you can imagine. Okay, if you don't want this to be really confusing, maybe you'll say, hey, I get your thumb down because it's confusing, I don't understand, what's that a custom authentication? Let me do that, at least the class. So say this is my custom authentication, okay, which implements the authentication contract. Now this is the custom authentication. Of course, it will have to override a lot of methods. I'm not gonna put anything in them now, it's just for the sake of the demonstration. And we have a few more methods from the principle as well. Okay, here it is. Implies that implies should not be. No, let me check. Yeah, it's a default, so it's not needed. Okay, so you can just get this one out, and then you have here, so private final, let's say private final string priority. No, that's how this would look like. And of course, all these things will not be empty in a real world app where you have used this authentication somewhere, no? But this is how it would look like. And then instead of having this authentication, you just say new custom authentication of priority and all the other stuff that you need. Again, I didn't do much, but I just wanted to make sure you understand that this is really a custom authentication which presumably you have used in your application. I will not complicate more than this our example, but the idea is you understand the test part of it, because I think we already discussed using a custom authentication in the some of the first lessons of this playlist. So now you have to somehow say that this annotation is linked to this factory. So then I will use a second annotation here, and that one will be with security context, and here I can now specify that this class that I have just created is the factory to be used for the security context whenever the test sees this annotation. So what will happen is that when the test will run, it sees this annotation, the framework intercepts this annotation because it's retention runtime, so it will be able to intercept it with reflection. It searches for the annotation with security context that has been used to annotate this annotation, and it finds out which is the class implementing the logic that is used, that needs to be used to generate to create the test security context. So this is the test, meaning mock security context, which in the end is returned and used in the test context. Okay, so with that being said, if I'm running now the application, it should work the same as having with MockUser, so the test should pass. And the test should pass because it will basically do what we expect. It will still create a security context. So it will be, oh, I missed something somewhere. Oh, I don't know how I did that. Sorry, my mistake. But it's a custom authentication, no? So the difference between with MockUser and this custom user is that now we use a custom authentication, okay? So let me prove that, and then I'm going to also start the debugger, and I want to show you that it goes through there, okay? Okay, no problem. Let's see what's the problem, because it seems that 403 forbidden. Oh, I think that's the case because we use a custom authentication, and yeah, so the problem is that you can't use a custom authentication if the app doesn't know that custom authentication. So let me actually do what I started with. So I tried to explain you a little bit more, but username, password, token. So I really have to actually do that, because otherwise it's or either that or it's not, because let me actually see, because I think the idea is, so I don't have a name. Yeah, the problem is you need some of these things, so you can't simply just leave them completely alone. I think that's the problem. Details, principal is authenticated, very important to be true, otherwise of course it doesn't work. Maybe that was actually the case. If not, I will change the type completely, because it's also strange to create a test where you use a type for authentication which is not the type that the application uses. So normally when we do that is again starting from what we said at the beginning of our discussion, you do that precisely when we have the case where you use a different authentication. No, so that's the point. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, it's passing. Nice, cool. So that the point was most likely the fact that in here I was most likely it was these authenticated, because I think it makes the most sense. Like it was authenticated on false and we expect authentication, but it's very, very likely that it also searches for this. But again, normally it's not only that it will be an authentication implementation, but it will also be the same authentication implementation and not any implementation. Okay, and now the last thing for today, I'm gonna just put a breakpoint here, and I wanna right click, debug, and demonstrate that the test context really does what I promised you is doing, meaning it goes through this code and it creates this security context based on which we have the authentication. Yeah. So, oh, sorry, I had to say debug on the test, not on the application. And we expected it stops here on line 12. Okay, and it does. See, you see it's on line 12, and you can see that the priority is indeed low, because that's what we specified here on the method. So our expectation is matched. It creates a dummy test security context with exactly what we specified on the annotation. And then this is the way in which you can customize with any kind of attributes you would need for your authorization rules. So with that, now theoretically you know how to customize for any kind of test what you need. Besides the customization, and with MockUser you will also see, and I want to mention that as well, it's the last thing I will mention today, with user details. So there is one more annotation you might use, and this is an annotation that I don't, to be honest with you, I don't use very often in real world apps, because I didn't find it like comfortable enough to use. But just for you to know the idea, so with user details, what it allows to do, it allows you to create a user details bin, which you then have to specify, and in the user details service bin you can add user details. No, so you can do something like Java class custom user details service. You know that the user details service is the bin that Spring Security uses for getting the username, you know. And now you can basically create a custom logic, even a dummy test logic. So you can just say something like this: user details u1 is user with username, some password, some whatever you need here, and then you can have more of this, like say you have a user 1 2 3, and then you can just say return your user details, like if else something here. Or even better, you could actually use a bin of the in-memory user details and put your all the users there, something like that. So you can have something like this, where in the end you return one user details or another based on some conditions. So you can implement logic on how to select the users and what users to select based on the username for the test, and then you can simply just use it here. Say I think it should be with a low C, and it says it can't find the bin for some reason, because probably I forgot the service or component annotation. Okay, much better. And yeah, most likely this will work as well, because it's still authenticated, but the logic behind the scenes is different, meaning that instead of letting the mechanism behind the scenes create a dumb user for you, or creating a custom user, you have defined the source of the users, and then based on the source of the users, the test will create the authentication. And that's basically it. So that's everything you need to know in terms of testing. So you will find this also in the last chapter of my Spring Security in Action. You can find it also in the first edition. It will be in the second edition as well. Most likely you will either use with MockUser, and then when it's not possible, with custom MockUser. If you ever need a situation where you don't customize the user for the test itself, but the source of the users, then you can do that with the third solution, which is with user details. And that basically concludes everything we need to discuss about integration testing for Spring Security. And remember that everything that we discussed in this lesson is also applicable for any kind of framework that you use. So I used JUnit and I used MockMVC. You can use something else like Rest Assured, or I know something else. It should work the same. And secondly, it's not necessarily only about endpoint testing, what we did here, but you can use it with method security testing as well. So if you have used the pre-authorized, post-authorized, pre-filter, post-filter, secured, roles allowed annotations, anything related to method security, the same things apply. Just that in that case, you will not perform a call using MockMVC on an endpoint. You will simply call a method of a bean, but you will have to use one of these three ways to have previously the authentication based on which you test the authorization. Guys, with that being said, I'm gonna end day, and of course I still do expect all your questions in the comments section, and I will try to answer as more of them as possible in other comments, or even in videos that I will create if they are not possible to be answered in a comment. Please do continue following me. Thank you very much for being here, and I wish you an excellent time for study further till next time. See you and goodbye.